Okay, today the second concept I'm going to introduce is one that's already pretty familiar with us in Japanese, but let's review a little bit. So when we're counting in English, we can say something like, I have one dog. How about in Japanese? Which of these different ways of phrasing it do you think is correct? So could I say, ichi inu ga imasu? Or inu ga ichi imasu? Or inu ga ippiki imasu? Ichi inu ga imasu is not right. Neither is inu ga ichi imasu. We have to say inu ga ippiki imasu. So in Japanese, as we have talked about before, numbers like ichi, ni, san always have to go with a counter. We can't just count things by themselves in Japanese with the number. We have to put a counter there to make it work. This does happen in English too, if we think about it. In English, we don't have this with every single word, but there are a lot of words that we have this with. For example, we can't say in English one gum. We have to say one piece of gum, or one pack of gum, or one stick of gum. We don't say one lettuce. We say one head of lettuce. There's a big difference between 3 pieces of cake and 3 cakes. We don't usually say 4 pants. We say 4 pairs of pants. We don't say 5 papers, we could say as in I have to write 5 papers. But a physical sheet of paper, we say 5 sheets of paper or 5 pieces of paper. So we do have kind of a similar counter concept in English. We just don't apply it to everything. In Japanese, we apply it to everything. So as we've talked about before, when we're trying to decide what counter to use in Japanese, we have to think about what kind of object it is, and often what the shape of it is. So we divide between things that are alive and things that are not. Among things that are alive, we divide between humans, animals, and then among animals, even more. Are they big animals, small animals? Are they birds? When we're talking about the shape of objects, we talk about if they're flat or thin, if they're book-shaped, if they're cylinders, etc. So we're going to introduce a bunch of new counters in this chapter. So when we want to count in Japanese, we use the number and the counter. But as you already know, some numbers are going to change depending on the counter. For example, we don't say ichisai in Japanese, we say issai. Issai. And some counters are going to change depending on the number. If you want a handy chart of the new counters that we are talking about in this lesson, and of some of the counters that we have talked about before, you can take a look on page 73 of your textbook. So let's review some of the counters that we have talked about before. So when we count people in Japanese, what is the counter that we use? That's right, it's nin. When we count people, we use nin. But the first couple ones are special, right? So let's look at them together. We have hitori, futari, 3人, 4人, 5人, 6人, 7人, 8人, 9人, 10人, and for a question word, 何人? We also have our word for flat objects. So we talked about hagaki, or CD, or T-shatsu. For these ones, we use the counter mai. And the good news about the counter mai is that it's all regular, right? 1枚, 2枚, 3枚, 4枚, 5枚, 6枚, 7枚, 8枚, 9枚, 10枚, 何枚. We also talked briefly in chapter 8, I want to say. We talked briefly in one of the chapters in 1020 about a counter, a sort of generalized counter that we use especially for a lot of like smaller objects. This one is one of the really tricky ones. One thing that can help is that this counters, the way that the words are, is very similar to the ones that we learned with days of the month. But we have hitotsu, futatsu, mitsu, yotsu, itsutsu, mutsu, nanatsu, yatsu, kokonotsu, and to. And our question word is ikutsu. So these are all of the counters we have talked about, or the main counters that we have talked about up to this point. Today, I'm going to introduce some new counters. So one of them is dai. Dai. This is a counter that we use for different kinds of vehicles and also machines. So for example, a toraku, we count with dai. Kuruma, we count with dai. Denwa, we count with dai. Computer, we count with dai. Jitensha, we will count with dai. And once again, this is one of our easy ones because it's all regular. We just put a number plus dai. So we have, 皆さん言ってください。1台、2台、3台、4台、5台、6台、7台、8台、9台、10台、何台? So this one is very simple. Our next counter is ko. We use this to count small items, especially ones that are sort of like roundish in shape, generally. This is actually used to count the same kind of things that we count with that weird su counter that we talked about before. The difference between this one and that weird su counter from before, this one is a little bit easier to remember. And also we can use this one to count above 10. The other one really only goes up to 10. We can only use this one to talk about things that are physical, though. We can't use it to talk about abstract concepts. So it's really more focused on physical things as a general counter for small objects. This one has a couple of weird ones, so let's look at them together. We have ikko, nikko, sanko, yonko, goko, rokko, nanako, hakko, kyuko, jukko, and nanko, or ikutsu. So ikko, rokko, hakko, and jukko are the weird ones that we have to watch out for. Our next counter is for bound objects, and by that we mean anything that is like bound together like a book. So a book is counted with this, a magazine is counted with this, a notebook is counted with this, anything that is bound together in a book sort of fashion, we count with satsu. Satsu also has a couple of tricky ones, so let's look at them together. We have issatsu, nisatsu, sansatsu, yonsatsu, gosatsu, rokusatsu, nanasatsu, hassatsu, kyusatsu, and jissatsu. And then our question word, nansatsu. So once again, issatsu, hassatsu, jissatsu are the weird ones that you have to look out for. Our next counter is one that is very useful to those of you who have pets. Hiki is our way of counting small animals. So we use hiki for 例えば犬とか猫。Mushi are also usually hiki. Sakana are usually hiki. This risu is also hiki. This one is another one that has some weird ones. Let's look at them together. We have 1匹、2匹、3匹、3匹、4匹、5匹、6匹、7匹、8匹、9匹、10匹、and 何匹? So once again, 1匹、2匹、3匹、4匹、5匹、6匹、7匹、8匹、9匹、10匹、何匹? So the special ones that you need to watch out for here are 1匹、3匹、6匹、8匹、10匹, and the question word 何匹 is also special. Our last one is hong, bon, or pong. So this is another one where the counter changes. This is used for like cylindrical objects or long, thin objects. I know it's weird that the kanji for book is not used to count books. But this kanji also has to do with like the root of something. So you can think of like the roots of trees are kind of long, thin, cylindrical shapes, right? So we might count necktie or 鉛筆, hana, and botoru with this hon ですね. Something else we also count with hon is, for example, 映画. This might seem really strange to us, but we have to remember that movies were originally shot on film, right? So you'd have like a reel of film. So that's like a long, thin object, right? So let's take a look at this counter. We have 1本、2本、3本、4本、5本、6本、7本、8本、9本、10本、何本? So this one follows a pattern that matches with the hiki that we just talked about, where the 1, 6, 8, 10, and the question are special. Or sorry, the 1, 3, 6, 8, 10, and the question are special. This one too. 1, 3, 6, 8, 10, and the question are a little special. So 1本、3本、6本、8本、10本, and 何本 are the ones we have to be careful of. So let's take a look at some of these. What counter do you think you would use for each of these categories? So how about kaeru? Kaeru are these little animals here. What would I use for kaeru? These are hiki ですね. How about sara? A new word from this chapter, sara. These are mai. They are flat objects. How about a banana? Banana is a hon. How about hito? Hito goes with nin. Denwa? Denwa are dai. Sakana? Hiki. Zashi? Zashi is satsu. Kurippu, like a paper clip. これはko, or we can use that su counter as well. Hagaki, a postcard. Wa mai. 映画. This one is 本. Like I said, it's a little weird. We're thinking of like a film strip. So these are our new counters. Now when we use counters in sentences, this is just a reminder. So we can say, for example, 昨日雑誌を3冊買いました。昨日雑誌を3冊買いました。or 家に犬が1匹います。家に犬が1匹います。or みかんを6個ください。みかんを6個ください。So when we make a sentence with a counter in it, there are 2 points to remember. One, usually the most natural way to say it is to have the number after the noun. So not before, but after. And two, usually we will talk about one exception in the next video, but generally speaking, there should not be a particle after the counter. So we have to put the counter after both the noun and the particle. So 雑誌を and then the particle and then the verb right after. 犬が and then the counter and then the verb right after. みかんを and then the counter and then the verb right after. So the counter and the verb go right next to each other. The particle and the noun go right next to each other. So now we've talked about the basics of counters. Let's practice them a little bit, and then I'll teach you an extra thing that you can do with counters in the next video.